Remember hear that statistic where like 70% of people can't afford like a $400 or $500 emergency or anything like that? Yeah, well, things are continuing to go in that direction because people are just flat out broke right now, guys. And I'm going to show you what I mean here and prove it, because there was a survey done recently from Go Banking Rates, and they determined that about half of everybody who answered has $500 or less in their savings account. Only 29% have between $501 and $5,000 in their savings account. And only 21% have $5,000 or more in their savings account. And to me, this is proof that people are broke, guys, because if only 21% of people have more than $5,000 in their savings account, that means that roughly 80% of American households are just one paycheck away from not being able to pay their bills, which is a very vulnerable situation to be in. And I talk about this here on the channel. And the reason I talk about it is because a lot of people think, well, you know, there's not gonna be any forced selling, Michael. People aren't gonna be forced to put their houses on the market. You know, everybody has a low interest rate and all of this, but people are failing to look at the actual fundamentals and dig a couple layers deeper, which is saying that 80% of households don't have $5,000 ready to go. Now, you could say, well, that's per person, and maybe if you have a married couple, one of them's a better saver than the other, and the other one has like 20 grand saved up. So maybe that could compensate for it. Yeah, maybe. Right? Maybe. Oh wait, but there's more, because 60% of the people surveyed said that they have $500 or less in their checking accounts, while only 12% said they have $2,000 or more in their checking account, guys. So these people are basically broke. You're living paycheck to paycheck in this situation, you know. Most people would be hard pressed to have a monthly budget for their household be less than like $3,000 a month these days when it comes to all the expenses. Maybe you can get by on less if you live in a cheaper, lower cost of living area, but still, that's not leaving a lot of room for an emergency. And since about 65 or 60% of people in the US are homeowners, that means a large percentage of people who own a home are in this category, guys. So if the economy starts taking a much bigger turn for the worse, when you start seeing a lot more layoffs, which we already have been seeing since the beginning of the year, and more people can't afford to pay their bills, what do you think they're gonna do? They're gonna look to offload their house. And the problem is, guys, like nobody has an emergency fund anymore. People are living paycheck to paycheck and they don't have any money saved up. And the emergency fund today is now the credit card. That's what people are looking at using as the emergency fund, rather than actually have the money saved up. Just like people that want to do renovations on their house. Like, oh no, I'm not gonna save the money myself. I'd rather just get a home equity loan or a home equity line of credit and borrow more money against the house, and you know, the house pays for it. Well, not really, you pay for it, and a pretty high interest rate at that. I'm not exactly sure what the reason for this mentality is, but I think some of it could be because ever since we had the great financial crisis back in 2008, that might have changed a lot of people's mentality about how money works, because we saw for basically the first time ever the government come in with a huge rescue package. They bailed out a bunch of big banks and the automakers, you know, and basically gave them a get out of jail free card, like here's a bunch of money on behalf of the US taxpayer, try not to do it again, is what happened. And so when people see that, and they also saw that the government can print all this money, and then we had round two happen during the pandemic, it gives people the idea that maybe I don't have to save money, because you know, if our government can just come in and save us anytime, then why save money? I might as well just be leveraged to the hilt and be eyeballs deep in bad debt and worry about it when the time comes. So it is pretty shocking how many people just don't have any money saved up. But what's even more shocking, if you ask me, is how many people that are saving money do not have it saved in a high yield savings account. Guys, this is a free thing that people can access today. It's been around for a long time now. And since the interest rates have been up over the past couple years, you know, it has been not such a bad deal to have money in these accounts, and you're getting paid interest every month for doing this. And the fact that there's so many people who are not doing it is kind of mind-blowing. This place is a house that's being marketed as just an empty piece of land, even though there's a perfectly good house here, but they're marketing it as a teardown for $5.4 million. It's a golf course home that has likely been sitting empty since April of 2018 because they bought it for $1.975 million back then, tried selling it in 2018 until the deal fell through, then tried renting it and that didn't work, and relisted it for sale recently in January. And now this house is just sitting here empty. Nobody's been living in this house for almost 6 years. They have a property tax bill of almost 42 grand a year, and nobody's buying it, guys. This is just insane. Too much nice empty housing sitting here in our country that people could just be living in. Instead, greed is taking over, and the end result is we get houses that sit empty for 6 years. Right now, you know, the average high yield savings account is paying about 4.5% interest rate, so it's not bad. And you know, for the big banks, guys, the banks that most people use for whatever reason still only are paying about 0.6%. So even with all the interest rate hikes that we've had, they've been keeping all that extra money for themselves and paying their customers nothing. Only 9.8% of people that even have any savings at all have a high yield savings account. That is abysmal, guys. That just goes to show you the level of financial intelligence we're at right now in this country. Like, people just don't have a clue. People are not paying attention to what's happening with their money. They're not paying attention to what they're spending. They're not paying attention to if they're even earning anything on the money that they do have saved, if any. It is crazy. And this is especially hard for somebody like me to understand, because since I was a small kid, I've always been fascinated by money. You know, I used to love getting money as a gift. You know, if there was like money in an envelope or a card or something like that, I would just go berserk because I loved it. You know, I thought it was great to have that cash in my hand as a kid. And then as I got older and trying to figure out, like, now that you start making a little bit of money, what do you do with it? Well, the first thing is you learn how to save it, right? And then you don't really know much about interest rates or anything like that. But as you get even a little bit older and you become a young adult and you're on your own, then you start becoming more concerned with that because you need to make every dollar go further. And people are leaving money on the table, guys, and you might not realize it, especially if you have such a low balance. Like, if you're somebody that only has $500 in your savings account, if you're like with one of the big banks, you're making $3 a year in interest right now, versus if you switch to a high yield savings account, you'd be making $22.50. And you can say, oh, well, that's not a big deal. Well, it is a big deal if you continue contributing to it and you continue saving and continue earning on your high interest savings account, guys, because as you continue adding more money to it, you are compounding your interest. Every month you're earning interest on a higher balance, and your interest payments will be a little bit higher each month, and it all adds up in the end. And recently, Capital One Bank, they got busted over this because they basically scammed a bunch of their clients, because what they did is they have a high yield savings account, which is not as good as these ones that we're talking about here. Theirs pays only like 3% or 3.5% or whatever, but they have a more traditional savings account that's not a high yield savings account, and they tricked a bunch of their customers into thinking that their money was in the high yield savings account and earning a decent amount of interest versus practically nothing in the lower one. But it actually wasn't true. They talked to one guy who built up his emergency fund, and over the years he has been banking with Capital One. He didn't say how much money he has saved in there, but he has a 5-figure balance. He says he's missed out on about $1,000 a year in interest. So you can reasonably think that maybe he probably has about $20,000 in there if he's missing out on about $1,000 a year in interest. So what ended up happening is in 2019, Capital One introduced a new savings account called 360 Performance Savings. Existing customers were kept in the older savings account that pay basically nothing. And the problem is that old account had a similar name as the new account, and a lot of the customers thought that their money was automatically, transferred into the new high interest savings account. So customers from Capital One around the country have now come together to file a class action lawsuit against Capital One over this because of the misleading tactics, making it look like you have your money in a high yield savings account when in fact all this time it was just sitting in the peanuts account making nothing. Some people even asked the bank to pay them the back interest that should have been owed on them, and of course they were denied, so they're taking it to court. So what they did is they basically abandoned their old customers in pursuit of new customers and never bothered to tell them that, hey, by the way, if you want to earn this higher yield, you need to move your money to this new account. No. What they did instead, make it look very similar to the new account, helping people assume that it was already being moved to this new account. Now I will say right off the bat, guys, like anybody who just assumes that your money is being moved to a new account, I don't care where you bank at, is a big false assumption. Because I don't think that the bank is illegally allowed to move your money anywhere to any new account without your say-so. Unless they explicitly, send you a letter in the mail in writing saying, your account type is being converted over to this account type or whatever, then it's not happening. So these people were duped. I'm not saying that they weren't, but it's also foolish to assume that the bank is automatically switching your account over to something new with no notice of that. But some people really got ripped off by this big time because they talked to another guy who had over 6 figures in the Capital One account. When he went to Capital One's website, it looked like they were paying the higher interest rate, and that's what they were giving him. But in fact, after he read about this lawsuit, he found out with his own account that he wasn't getting the interest rate promised either. So this guy missed out on thousands and thousands of dollars worth of interest payments, and he's moving all his money to Ally Bank. Now, I'm not normally one to tell you exactly what to do, but when it comes to this, you need to make sure that you know what's going on with your money, guys. Especially if you have a substantial amount saved, you need to be earning a good amount of interest on it right now, first of all. And secondly, whenever you go to open a new bank account, because I recently just did this, I opened up a new high yield savings account in order to spread the money around a little bit and get a higher interest rate with the new one I opened. I only put a little bit of money in it first. I only put in like $1,000 for the first month just to make sure that I was getting the interest rate that was promised before sticking a larger sum in there. So you should test things out. If you're gonna open up a new bank account with somebody you've never banked with before, you need to be cautious. You need to just make sure you're gonna be getting the appropriate amount of interest when doing this. But man, oh man, even in a high interest rate environment, people that have money saved are getting scammed by their own bank now because they don't want to pay people. And this was done intentionally. Of course it was. This is not some kind of system error, especially with the similar name type of thing. And I'm pretty sure these people that are suing Capital One are probably going to win this lawsuit. But it's just a good lesson, to learn from other people's mistakes, guys. Like, hey, wake up. You need to make sure you know what's happening with all of your money, especially if you have a lot of it. You have to know where it's all sitting, how much it's earning, and if there's any better opportunities that might exist out there. Now, we just got the latest GDP figures in for the last quarter of 2023, and people are jumping up and down about this because it was a 3.3% reading, and it was only estimated to come in around the 1.5% range. So economists and people in the stock market, everybody's freaking out thinking this is amazing, the US economy is still on fire, and there's no sign of a recession anywhere. But here's the crazy thing about this, guys. Even though the economy is still doing well and GDP is higher than expected right now, the stock market is still pricing in between 5 to 6 rate cuts from the Fed this year, when the Fed themselves even said there was only going to be 3, but they're still expecting double what the Fed said. And this is absolutely crazy. If the economy is doing so well, like supposedly it is here with these numbers, the Fed doesn't have any incentive to cut rates. They might not cut rates at all if it stays like this throughout 2024. And a lot of people who are banking on this in the stock market are probably going to be disappointed when all these rate cuts don't come through. And even if they do come through, that means that things are not going so well, because that's kind of like the opposite behavior, right? Think about this. Inflation was running away and the economy was doing too well because it was overstimulated. So what did the Fed do? They raised interest rates, right? Well, they've been able to slow things down. Inflation has been coming down and slowing down. But according to these GDP figures, the economy is still running hot. And so if the Fed lowers their interest rates this year, especially by too much, inflation is going to come roaring back, and that's the last thing that they want. So once again, what incentive does the Fed have to cut rates 5 or 6 times this year, guys? According to this data, looks like none. And some of these comments from the experts and the analysts are just funny. Like, listen to this. The US economy has shown remarkable resilience in the face of higher interest rates and soaring inflation, with consumer spending once again being a driver of GDP growth. This comes despite a stark burn rate on excess savings and sharp jumps in the amount of people paying on personal loans rather than mortgages. The US public is absorbing far more shocks than expected, but that's not to say the storm will blow over without consequence. Now, this is basically like all these stories you're hearing is everybody's celebrating way too soon on this, thinking that we're out of the woods because of these GDP figures and that the spending is still happening. Well, first of all, the spending was in the fourth quarter, which is holiday shopping season when everybody's spending. So there's that. But no one's going to look at this and say, oh, isn't this kind of strange that things are going along this strong at the same time that there's this many people who are broke, this many people who are delinquent on credit cards and car loans and all of this? Isn't that kind of a contradiction? Isn't there anybody out there thinking this besides me? Well, I know there are, because a bunch of you tell me in the comments, but I'm just saying from like the news perspective and our government, our policymakers, taking all this to heart and saying, hey, everything is great, man. And there was actually a recent study done from the IMF, okay? And they looked at more than 100 inflation episodes across 56 countries since the 1970s. And they found out that inflation was brought down to desired levels within 5 years in just 60% of the cases. So we're talking 5 years to fight inflation, and even then with only a 60% success rate. That's not very good, which is exactly why everybody who's been celebrating this whole soft landing theory that this is going to happen is kidding themselves right now. What their study found was when central banks stayed the course and accepted more short-term pain, inflation was more reliably controlled, and GDP, employment, and wages recovered well over a 5-year horizon. They go on to say that the economy is likely to prosper more if the Fed finishes the job by getting core inflation to 2% before further pushing down interest rates. That's just giving them a higher chance of success. That's not even a guarantee. So once again, guys, everybody's saying that they're going to be cutting rates again soon, as early as March. Like, huh? We still are way above the 2% range that they need to be in to even think about cutting it in order to have a chance of success. So this is almost a guarantee here by just looking at this, that if they start cutting too early before they get to that 2% rate, then it's almost a guarantee we're going to see a resurgence in inflation. So once again, this is proof that nobody really knows anything, including people at the Fed. I hope you have your popcorn ready, guys, because it's going to be an interesting show to watch this year, to say the least. And we already know that we can't trust what the Fed does because, it was their brilliant idea to keep interest rates extremely low all these years. They've been in charge of our monetary policy, and look where that's gotten us, nowhere but, screwed over essentially at this point. So to trust that they're going to be able to handle this with grace and get us into this Goldilocks zone over the next couple of years is a joke. One thing I will say though is I do have faith in America. I know Americans are resilient people. That's our heritage as Americans, and that's probably partly the reason why things haven't completely fallen apart yet. People find ways to get by month after month, even if things aren't going well. But that can only happen for so long, and it's only because we're still in a positive growth situation. We're still in a situation where people are able to get jobs relatively easy. But the moment that changes, it changes everything, guys. So we'll be keeping a close eye on where things go here in 2024. So if you enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe to the channel. And if you don't want to wait for my next video to come out, check out this one on the screen right over here, and I'll see you in the next one.